All right, greetings everyone. I'm Taya Bolton, producer of Aspire Conversations, and I want to introduce you and welcome you back to another session of this series. This series is a solution focused series dedicated to addressing systemic injustices that impact the Black business community. The series was birthed out of the Black Lives Matter movement. From there was born this Black Business Matter movement and the Aspire Conversation series. These sessions will include special guests as you'll see today, and then we'll always have policymakers, small business owners, and other community leaders. At the end of each session, there will be a call to action. We ask that you join us in moving that action forward. We need you, and the time for transformation is now. By the way, our inaugural session's call to action was to go and patronize at least two Black businesses by August the 31st. We want to know if you did that. If you did, please go ahead in the comments section of our Facebook thread here and let us know what Black businesses you patronize, tag their businesses and share. And that helps us to create a greater awareness for the Black community. To see the schedule and register for future sessions, you can view the website at aspirecommunitycapital.org/Aspire Conversations. This series will run through February 2021. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and get things turned over to Aspire's founder and CEO, Manuel Campbell.
So first and foremost, let me thank everyone for sharing this time with us. I know that this is a busy time for a lot of people. There's a lot going on both socially as well as health related in our community. So I want to thank you for joining us for this series. Excuse me. The one thing that I'd like to share is to kind of give you a little background about Aspire. So Aspire's mission is to radically transform lives and communities through small business ownership. And we do that through a three-tiered approach. First and foremost, starting with our Community Business Academy, which is a 12-week training program where we focus on teaching entrepreneurs the essential skills and tools that they need to run a successful business. And secondly is our Business Accelerator Services. And in our Business Accelerator Services program, we provide business coaching and training for aspiring entrepreneurs who have graduated from our Community Business Academy. And last but certainly not least is our Access to Capital program. Well, we not only want to be a source where we train entrepreneurs as well as coach them, but we also want to be a source of capital for them. And we do that through our micro loan program, which we will launch fourth quarter of this year. So without further ado, I think it's a great and amazing panel that we pulled together to really talk about the history of Black business in Charlotte. And I look forward to the discussion.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Ronnie Bryant, and I have the honor of serving as the chair of the board for Aspire Community Capital. And today I have the honor of serving as the moderator for our panel on the history of Black businesses in Charlotte. I have three very distinguished Charlotteans with me this afternoon. I have Gerald Johnson with the Charlotte Post, Dr. Tom Hanson with History South, and Dion Nelson with Laurel Street. And we'll jump right into this, what I hope will be a very lively and informative discussion. And I want each of our panelists to introduce themselves and then just give us a few minutes on your perspective of just how you see things now today. Well, this has been a very unique 6 months for us here in 2020. The year started with such great promise for a lot of us and took a very drastic turn around the beginning of March into February. And I would just like your perspective from where you sit. So Gerald, we'll start with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie. My name is Gerald Johnson. I'm the CEO and publisher of the Charlotte Post publishing company. We publish African-American newspapers here in Charlotte, the Charlotte Post, and in Raleigh, the Triangle Tribune. And we've been doing that since 1974 in my family. Charlotte Post has been around since really 1878, well before my time, more in Ronnie's time, but it's been around for a long time. But and interestingly, you would bring that question up because the newspaper is in the communications business. We depend heavily on advertising dollars. And obviously with the pandemic hitting, and let me start off by saying the year started off so great, January, February, we were actually doing much better than we had expected. We were over our previous year, about 45% revenue. But then in March, COVID hit and stores started closing. Our advertising dollars dropped by 45%. And our gain for the period we lost over the next several months. But it's beginning to come back now. But the pandemic has had a very, very serious impact on business in general, and African-American businesses. It's really, really had a very hard impact on our revenue streams. Fortunately, we were working with another organization and in terms of strategies. And even before the pandemic hit, we had decided that we needed to sort of change our revenue flowing and diversify from so much advertising dollars being our strength. And we had already started that project before COVID hit, and that helped us. That helped us sort of get through it. So it's been a rough year, and it's not going to get any better in the near future. But in time, we look forward to it, to coming out of this. Oh, let me say one other thing too. Normally, when we go through a bad economic situation, it's either locally, statewide, or at least nationally. But this is a worldwide crisis, which has a serious impact on everybody. And I haven't lived long enough to see a worldwide crisis, and so it's been actually devastating.
That's great. That's so true, Joe. Thank you. Tom, welcome.
Great to be here. I'm a community historian. I worked with Levine Museum of the New South for a long time here in Charlotte, and wrote a book, which I'm going to tell you how wonderful this is. I don't get any royalties. We published a new edition this spring that takes the story of Charlotte's history right up to the present, and we wanted it to be really affordable. So called Sorting Out the New South City, how Charlotte got to be a big city, but also how it got to be a segregated city, both in terms of race and ethnicity, but also economically segregated. And a lot of the issues that we're running up against right now are issues that are rooted in that history. If you look at who's getting hurt worst with the COVID health problems, it is people who have been hurt worst by other things that come down the pike. If you look at the economic slowdown, the people who are getting hurt worst are not the folks who are the billionaires. I don't know if you all are billionaires, but I sure ain't. And it is the workaday folks, what we now wonderfully call essential workers. For a long time, we just assumed as a society that people who were food service workers and nurse assistants and first responders, and well, they're just kind of a dime a dozen. We don't have to pay them. We don't have to give them much respect. And so that change, I want to end on a hopeful note with my little bit here. There's so much that's not hopeful. The George Floyd murder, the Breonna Taylor murder, we are seeing on our screens something that African Americans have known about for a long time. In your local community, there has been inequality, but now we're seeing it nationally, and folks of my complexion are seeing it. And to me, the hopeful thing coming out of it is that there seems to be a sense of outrage, not just on the part of African American folks, but all folks, not everybody, but every complexion is pitching in and saying, we need to change this system.
Thanks, Tom. And I really like the way you slipped that book in there, man. That was pretty good.
Subtle enough.
And I like it. You brought it back. That's good.
A great read too, Tom.
Welcome, Dion.
Good afternoon. I'm Dion Nelson. I'm president and CEO of Laurel Street Residential. Laurel Street is a mixed income housing development company based in Charlotte, North Carolina, working throughout the Southeast. I founded the firm in 2011. So this is our 9th year of operation. In that time, we've probably grown to be one of the most productive, affordable, and workforce housing developers in the state. We develop across the Southeast from as far north as Richmond, Virginia to Atlanta, Georgia, with the bulk of our portfolio in North Carolina. In our 9 years of work, we have developed a portfolio of about 3,600 units and continue to grow with a great pipeline and trajectory ahead of us. But at the end of the day, I'm an entrepreneur, and we have grown a very successful development company in a short period of time. And our opportunity is to effectively, frankly, double the size of our business in the next 1.5 to 2 years. But that is a particularly challenging undertaking, especially when you're hit with COVID in the middle. So we are moving forward. My perspective through this has been that we have to survive. How do we get to the other side? What decisions do we need to make as a company and as a team in order to be healthy and productive as an organization when we get to the end of what we currently see as this pandemic crisis? So that's been largely our perspective, and happy to engage as you talk more about the realities of what it has been to open, build, and grow a business in Charlotte.
Oh, to stay with you, Deanna, and thanks for that overview. Tell me a little bit about how you address COVID, and what changed from February 1 to March 1 or April 1 in your business, and how did you address it?
Well, I think a big piece of it, frankly, as the organizational leader, has been my ability to come to terms with the reality. I'll be very honest that I think it was like March 10th or something. One of my employees said, "Well, how are we going to respond to Corona?" And my answer is, we're going to go to work. That's what we're going to do. I mean, I couldn't process anything else, right? And 3 days later, I closed my office. And the reality of what was clearly mounting as something that was very real, it was something we had to adjust to. We pivoted to a remote environment, which wasn't that hard for my office structure and my team structure, because we had the electronic tools in place, but it was a very different way of working. I have tried more than once to go back to the office, and as the numbers continue to post worse and worse and worse, I had to come to terms with the reality a second time to say, look, we're not going back anytime soon. So I have since adjusted and said we're not going back to our normal office structure in 2020. But I did make the decision to maintain our entire staff, and we have carried our overhead through the entire pandemic, even though our revenue, to Mr. Johnson's point, has declined significantly. We typically, as a company, benefit from starting new construction projects. And while we are in a market where construction has not stopped, so everything that was under construction has continued to deliver, if we don't start new projects, we don't get new development revenue, right? And that's how we really carry our overhead. And it is now September 10th, and this is the first year in our company history where we have not closed a new construction project in 9 months. And so that is very real for us. We are burning cash. We have losses. We have had losses every month of the year. And that is not a sustainable scenario for us. Having said that, I think you have to think differently about ways to finance your business. I downsized my office space. I delayed the build out of a new 6,000 square foot office. We kicked the can down the road, and we're not going to, Manuel's talking about, he saw our new warehouse. It's a warehouse because I'm not going to upfit it in 2020. That's not the right way for us to spend cash. And so we've delayed all of the, I would say, ancillary decisions. And my focus was on maintaining the team, but also maintain a team for their well-being and our company's well-being, but also because our pipeline remains very real. And if we downsize our overhead and our team, I can't produce in 2021, right? You can't flip a switch on affordable housing. It is a long lead time business, and we have to continue to produce in order to be a producer in the future.
Great, I like that. Tom, historically, from your perspective and really well-respected historian in our community, can you track the evolution of Black-owned business in Charlotte as it relates to how that tracking has kept up with the progress of white-owned businesses? Is there a clear enough distinction in the pattern of growth?
Yeah, there's a considerable difference, and it's not for lack of trying. I sent Taya Bolton an image of the MIC building, which is a kind of a useful touchstone. This is one of the yellow brick building on the right there is one of 4 buildings that survived from the old Brooklyn neighborhood. And Brooklyn was an African-American neighborhood that came into being as segregation got worse around 1900. African-Americans built their own Black Main Street, their own institutions, housing. A lot of the neighborhood was owned by absentee landlords, white folks outside the neighborhood. But the best of the neighborhood was sort of Black cooperative capital. Mecklenburg Investment Company was a Black cooperative. One of the leaders was, not surprisingly, an educator who was also a doctor, J.T. Williams. There's a J.T. Williams School in Charlotte. And that professional level African-American leadership is something that is very, very strong in history. One of his other partners in that was Thad Tate, who was a barber. That was a big deal back then. There were almost no white barbers serving white folks. It was Black barbers serving white folks. And that was part of the tradition of being an artisan. Back in slavery times, a lot of the skilled jobs were handled by African Americans. And one, to bring in another guy, was brickmaking. Brickmaking, masonry, architecture. And both of these buildings are by a Black architect named W.W. Smith, who was out of Charlotte. He was the apprentice of William Hauser, who was an African American who was the main Black brick manufacturer in this part of the Carolinas back around at the turn of the last century. So, wow, all of that coming together, but the momentum, what Deanne was talking about, that when hard times come, how do you keep the momentum going? And the MIC building's momentum decreased when the Great Depression came. And I worry that we're in that situation again, where the need to come together. This is a model, but also the limits of only cooperative effort. You need to, in our conversation early on, you need to be bankable, and that might be a thing to play off this history.
Very much so. Now, for purpose of orientation, is this Brevard and 3rd Street?
This is Brevard and 3rd Street. If you continued just down this street, you would come to the basketball arena. You would come to the transit center. If you walked back the other direction, you'd be at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So you're right on the Lynx line downtown. And there's a new effort to kind of reinvigorate the Mecklenburg Investment Company idea. Folks coming together using that building and the church as well, the old church, Grace AME Zion, as an event center, for African-American entrepreneurship, philanthropy, those kind of things.
Tom, you talked about collaborative business and economic efforts, and one of the current topics within the economic development environment now is equitable economic development, and meaning that having our communities look at economic development across all economic sectors, where Charlotte has been in the past, and I was personally involved, of focusing our economic development efforts in one particular area. We went after the top stratosphere of development, business recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. And the economic mobility report really exposed Charlotte as well as other cities in their in their lack of paying attention to the full community. As you remember, Charlotte was number 50, and our big brother to the south, Atlanta, was number 49. And so, Gerald, I guess to your point, over the years you've been watching this. If in your business, are there any unique aspects that this pandemic has brought to your business being a Black-owned business that maybe a white newspaper of the same size would not have experienced, or the exposure and the consequences parallel?
They parallel. I can say that in this business, not even the same size, because a lot of community newspapers, the size of us have gone under. And even the bigger newspapers are struggling now. And the interesting thing about all of this is that this is an industry that was struggling even before COVID, because of just the industry itself being a labor-intensive industry. We were struggling because there are easier and more convenient ways to get news rather than trying to get it through a newspaper. But fortunately, we have survived that with other techniques. But yeah, all of people, this industry overall basically has been hit very hard, and everybody's trying to figure out a way to dig out of it. But also, it's brought a lot of us together, regardless of race, size, anything else, because we're all suffering from the same problem. So there are several organizations that are actively trying to make sure that newspapers that are independent newspapers, because one of the other problems we're facing is that a lot of people are buying up newspapers and turning it from being a local journalism activity to just trying to make a profit. And so the news is basically bad news. And unfortunately, we have to put up with that too. But these organizations got together to put up revenue to help sustain journalism that's actually considered independent journalism. And so that's helped a lot of us, regardless of size, in terms of, or race, in terms of trying to make it through this COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Dion, from your perspective, is there a contrast between a relatively same size white-owned developer versus you and what you have to deal with?
Yes. I think some of it is tangible in the context of, raising capital, et cetera. I mean, for me, that has been very grassroots. It has been very relationship driven. I don't have the friends and family network that most entrepreneurs in a similar position to me that are not African-American or people of color would have. So most developers raise their first round of financing, whether it's investing in buildings or building the company, et cetera, from a friends and family round. They pick up the phone and they call their dad and their cousin and their uncle, and they raise $1 million. I have never been able to do that. All of the capital that I raised in the first, I would say 5 or 6 years of Laurel Street's effort was frankly white, high net worth individuals.
Okay.
Who I happened to build a relationship with, and who happened to step up to the table and say that they believed in me and what I was trying to do, and that they were willing to help me. So there's a lot of grace in my story, is how I see it and how I express it, in that those relationships materialize and those people were willing to do that. There's also the intangible part of being an entrepreneur and doing this work. And frankly, when I say it's intangible, it's because you can't describe to people who don't experience it. All Black people get it. But I still face the repeated question of, well, do you really have the capacity to do that? And we're not sure about your financials. And, all those, dog whisper kind of questions, right? That frankly, have nothing to do with my track record or my credentials, frankly, but they have to do with the color of my skin. And I do not believe that my competitor, who has the same track record and the same credentials, but not colored skin, would necessarily face those questions as consistently as I continue to face those questions today in every market we go to.
Tom, I want you to follow up on that, but before we do, there's an audience question that addressing cooperative capital. Are you aware of any that's out there now?
I am not, and in fact, what Dion just said kind of answers that for her. That finding African American investors is really tough, and it is rooted in history. The Brooklyn neighborhood was demolished. The capital that was there was basically dissipated. Folks got some small compensation for their business building, but not for the track record, the pipeline, the networking that makes a business really happen. And so every generation seems like it has to start over. And that's what I'm hearing Dion Nelson say in her affordable housing work, is that she kind of has to start over. I'll tell you a story of attempt that was in some ways very successful, but ended up with a starting over scenario. The building that's now the Bob Walton building in the old Brooklyn neighborhood. It was a government building for many years on Stonewall at McDowell. Was Black Collaborative put that together, led by Julius Chambers and a whole lot of African-American professionals. It was called East Independence Plaza. It opened in the early 1970s. And it opened at the same moment within a block or a block and a half of the Cameron Brown building. Both of them were office towers. Both of them were looking for not just the initial collaborative, but for outside folks to rent. At Cameron Brown, the Cliff Cameron, who was head of Cameron Brown Mortgage and eventually First Union, sort of called in his chips, and the city ended up renting, city and county ended up renting multiple floors of that building for decades. At East Independence Plaza, nothing like that happened. And so eventually in the 1990s, the building was a community treasure. Folks who were part of it loved it, but they never were fully rented. And eventually in the 90s, the collaborative said, well, we're getting to retirement age. Let's get our capital back. And so what could have been a successful track record, as the Cameron Brown building was, wasn't.
Well, in that vein, Tom, track for me the historical relationship between Blacks and whites in Charlotte. Charlotte, from my perspective, I characterize it as being pretty corporately controlled, if you will, very institutional. Very little radicalism takes place in this town. We're pretty nice Southern folks. I coined the phrase the Charlotte no, where we won't look you in the face and say no. We'll just say, hey, I'll have to get back with you. Won't you call me back in 2 weeks? Instead of saying no. When I was in Pittsburgh asking for money and somebody didn't want to give it to me, they wouldn't say no. They would say, hell no, get out of my face. But you would never get that in Charlotte. So I guess from your perspective, from a historical perspective, what has been the relationship between the Black and white community over the years, and how do you characterize that relationship?
Well, that is such a big question, and because you've lived it, you have just given a really good answer. I'm impressed with the series on Charlotte's Black history that Dr. Pamela Grundy is writing right now in the Queen City Nerve. Not sure if I can mention that in the presence of the Charlotte Post publisher, but her thesis is that Charlotte has this nice thing going on, and they will reach out and partner and do stuff as long as it's moving the ball down the field in the way they want. If you're asking for something that they are not interested in, you get the okey doke, where people smile and you feel like you're respected and not much happens.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty true. Well, Gerald, from a newspaper perspective, when you think about your publication, I'm assuming at some point you have to make the decision. Being a Black-owned paper, you can be part of the system, or you can be antagonistic and challenge the system. What's your thinking about what role can your paper play, especially now? You know, we're pivoting now as a result of the pandemic, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement. Is there room for a publication? And I know I might be putting you on the spot, but you're tough.
Nothing is new for you, but go ahead.
But is there room for publication to really step out there and call it what it is when you see it, and let the chips fall where they may?
I hope that's what we're doing, because that's our whole premise. Now, the sad part of it is that just because of the condition of the economy right now, we don't have the staff to cover it the way we want to cover it, because we don't have enough resources to do it. But what resources we have, we try to do the best we can with that. But we also have a foundation where part of our foundation has an initiative called Black Lives Matter Charlotte, which we have events on a regular basis to talk about the issues that are impacting the African American community. Mm-hmm. And so we look at it as our job to do the best we can with what we got, but that's what we're here for. Otherwise, we'll just be trying to be a Black image of the daily white newspapers, and that's not what we're here for. We're here to tell the Black side of the story, and so that's our mission.
Okay, good.
But before you go to let me ask just to the question about capital.
Go ahead.
A lot of people. The one thing that's happened with what's going on now in the community with Black Lives Matter, which has been very interesting, is that a lot of major industries have come out and started putting out grant money to capitalize the situation with COVID, but more particularly the situation with Black Lives Matter. And depending on the size of your company and the grant, they are focusing in on companies that are Black owned that need capitalization during this period of those two things going on, COVID-19 and the issues with Black Lives Matter now. And so if you go out and start searching grants, even some banks are getting in the loop now. And if you search for grants on Tom's favorite thing, Google, you will probably come up with some companies like LISC is one of them that's out there putting out grants on a regular basis. And there are many companies out there that's doing it. So capital is available, especially for minority-owned companies. And so that's, go take a look at it, because you can find some money out there. And this is unfair. I've never seen this happen before. So okay, you can get some money right there.
If I may, I agree with you, Mr. Johnson, but I also would say for the right size company, because
the right size,
$25,000. $25,000 ain't gonna move the needle for me in the next 30 days, right? So, you know, there is something to kind of Charlotte's strategy around what scale businesses we support. So we say we support Black businesses, we want to encourage Black business growth, but I think to some degree, you can't be a startup, because then they say, well, you don't have a track record and there are all these other issues, but you also can't be too, I don't even consider Laurel Street a large business. We might be a mid-sized business, but you also can't be too far at the other end of the spectrum. So a lot of the Charlotte energy around supporting entrepreneurs and supporting Black businesses has been very, has focused on a kind of modest scale business. The mom and pop family owned, or the restaurant or something of that nature. And I'm not knocking that. We need those businesses and we need to support those businesses. But I would also argue that if you're really gonna grow the scale of Black business in Charlotte, you have to scale the mid-sized companies, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, the aha I've had through COVID and through really over the last couple of years where we talked about minority spending in construction, et cetera, I have learned the hard way that when we hire a majority, first of all, there is no minority general contractor in this town that we can hire that can bond the entire scope of a job that we do. It doesn't exist, right?
That
So
includes
we
Leaper.
hire the majority. And now I'm playing this game of trying to force my majority contractor to hire a minority business, right? I'm one step removed. And then they tell me that there's no minority business that has the capacity to do all these different trades and scopes. And so to some degree, when you grow I'm going to use contracting, for example, when you grow the mid-sized contractor and they are hiring the subs, you get a different ripple effect.
Yeah.
Because our effort to support one another is frankly going to be different than the majority contractors or the non-minority companies' effort. And I think that's one of the things that we can do differently as we go forward. Economic development can't just focus on the very, very top or the very, very bottom.
Agree, totally agree.
Agreed.
Tom, I'm coming at you a little bit. Some of the money Gerald was talking about, there's money out there in the grants, small grants, definitely according to Dion, that are very much available to small companies. And also there's a significant amount of money, in some cases small, in some cases not so small, money that's now being made available to a not-for-profit organization. Some people call this guilt money. I would like your perspective of that characterization. Is it guilt money, or do you think, based on the fabric of Charlotte and what you know about Charlotte, that there's really a genuine concern to help?
I don't know.
This was gonna be easy?
I don't spend enough time with the folks who are making those kind of investments to know for sure. So since I can't answer the question, let me answer a different question or bring a different idea in here. I'm impressed with what's happening in the affordable housing space. As a result of the protests after the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, we had new city council people elected. We had a new mayor elected who made it specifically a city priority to do affordable housing, put on the ballot a $50 million bond issue, which was overwhelmingly supported. And then philanthropic and corporate folks put up another 50 million. Dang, that is big money. It's not nearly big enough to solve the affordable housing problem, quote unquote. But that the scale of investment and the willingness of people at many different levels, from everyday voters to folks at the top of the corporate and philanthropic pyramid here, to engage this does give me hope.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, I don't understand. I mean, the question is, if I'm receiving guilt money or non-guilt money, I'm trying to get to your point. What's the point? Because
I'm looking for a characterization. Is it we're going to just throw some money at this because we feel sorry for what's going on, or we really, or should we really be thinking about a more a more strategic look at how we can apply resources in this community to really move the needle in an effort to invoke some systemic change in some of the things that are going on, i.e. Dion talked about, looking at mid-sized businesses and their capital need versus giving somebody a $10,000 check. You really have to be a small business, very small, for $10,000 to be the difference between you staying open and closing your door.
True.
If $10,000 is all it takes, you don't have a big problem. But that's not going to help a business that's really carrying the kind of overhead I'm quite sure you and Dion are carrying in an effort to stay sustainable. So what I'm trying to get at is historically, and that's why I kind of went to you with that, Tom. Does Charlotte have a history of, from the white community in particular, really caring or treating the Black community as just something I gotta deal with, and we'll do whatever we can do? Remember, I said earlier, Charlotte is a very corporately controlled town, at least from my perspective, and one of the few cities in this country that didn't have an uprising during the 60s, my understanding. Very quiet during a very tumultuous period in this country. I know from my own personal experience, the movement to protect the image of this town. I've been in many meetings with people very concerned about the image. Let's do something for the image. Forget what the problem is. We don't want Charlotte to look bad to the nation and to the world. So I'm just, I guess, putting you on the spot, but what's your perspective of that thinking?
Can I turn that question to Dion Nelson, because she deals with us all the time, particularly in context of that 50 million and 50 million thing I was talking about. And she's also over there smiling in a way that suggests she has an opinion about this.
Dion, you want to jump into that?
I'm just a smiler, Tom. I mean, I think Charlotte, I've been here 14 years, so I certainly don't have, either, the perspective that anybody on this panel has in terms of how Charlotte functions, but that has been my experience. Charlotte is reactive to the issue of the day and of the moment, and it needs to maintain its image. I think its response to the affordable housing crisis, frankly, from my perspective, and anybody who's been doing work in the affordable housing space for any meaningful period of time, this ain't new. We've always had an affordable housing crisis. It didn't just appear. What appeared was a report that put us 50 out of 50, right? And now, to clean up its image, we now need to talk about what's causing it. Obviously, affordable housing is near the top of that list. And so now we need to fix it. I am proud of Charlotte for its effort. I don't want anybody to misinterpret the fact that I am supportive of what we've done to raise a $50 million bond and to raise $50 million of private sector capital. But affordable housing in Charlotte is a $1 billion problem plus. Add some zeros, right? So you got a 30 some odd thousand plus deficit in Charlotte. $50 million is going to get you 1,500 units, maybe 2,000. It's not, we haven't changed the fundamental game, right? We will do more, we will make more of an effort, but yes, I do think there's something in the water with respect to maintain the image. There's something in the water that means go along to get along and follow the lead of the major institutions and controlling entities in this town. Maybe I shouldn't say that on Facebook Live, it's being taped, but it is what it is now.
Remember, you have limited liability, okay? All right.
But Charlotte has always been
limited liability. Come on. Let me hear you. I want to hear your response or your follow-up to Dion's perspective.
Who's that to?
Regarding the corporate or institutional control of our community?
I mean, Charlotte has always been that way. I can't remember the mayor's name, but I do remember that there was an uprising going around the country back in the day in the 60s, thereabouts. And when it was happening, the story was that the mayor at the time, and his name is come to me in a minute if my memory ever comes back, called all the Black leaders down to the city hall to talk about the issues that they didn't want that to happen in Charlotte. And they made a deal that those guys went back and sort of talked to the community to keep the burning and everything that was happening at that time from happening in Charlotte. The mayor is going to come to me shortly. But at any rate, the image of Charlotte, even to this day, when we're talking about things, guess what happened when we found out that we're number 50 out of 50 states for social media? What happened? The business community came together to put money into the table to make sure that our image stayed well. And so, I mean, we've always been about trying to keep our business image high. And you came into the city, so you know that as well as anybody in terms of how we've always fought to keep the image of the city clean so that we could keep business going well.
Right.
And so that's just what Charlotte is. That's what Charlotte is about. It's always been about that as long as I can remember.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it because you
Go ahead.
open up the dialogue. But I mean, even as an entrepreneur, you know, so I said at the outset, we've done 3,600 units in 9 years. About a third of that's in Charlotte. People perceive us as a Charlotte business, but I would have never grown Laurel Street to the level that I've been able to grow as a company in spite of the need for affordable housing in Charlotte. But because as a Black woman business owner, there's only so much we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have capacity to do more, and we want to have a greater impact in affordable housing. We're in Durham, we're in Cary, we're in Salisbury, we're in Belmont, we're in Atlanta. We got to go across town, you know, across the state in order to do more, because in Charlotte.
At the point well taken. Give me 30 seconds on this, Dion. If you had the money, if the money was there for affordable housing, I've been in several conversations about where would you build if you're talking the city limits of Charlotte, where would, if you needed 30,000 units, where would you put 30,000 units in the city limits of Charlotte?
Frankly, you need to put them everywhere, right? This idea that only certain, so yes, we need them in South Charlotte, we need them in Ballantyne. There are certain areas of a clear deficit, and we need to plug that deficit by going to what they describe as high opportunity areas very, very aggressively. A high opportunity is just a fancy word, a HUD word for higher income, you know, the growth parts of town, the wedge, effectively.
Where there's a lot of jobs.
But there's a lot of jobs there, and people can't afford to live near those jobs. So we definitely need to go after those neighborhoods directly. But I think we also have to we cannot ignore the crescent either. Because in my opinion, when you have things like, what was the deal a couple of years ago, Lake Arbor or something of that nature, that, you know, or the hotels and all these other places that people are living that really are substandard forms of housing, they can exist because there is no competition.
Right.
There is no high quality place to live in certain pockets of Charlotte where people can live with a decent standard of living that they can afford. And so they are settling for dilapidated old housing that is allowed to exist because it is privately owned, and there's no way to flip it. Well, we need to put them out of business. You can't put them out of business when you can't build across the street from them because the city says, I can't go to this neighborhood because it's too much affordable housing there. You need it everywhere if the point is 30,000.
I learned a new term, Noah. NOAH. I'd never heard of naturally occurring affordable housing before. So is that a good thing or bad thing?
It's an excellent thing in
Okay.
that if it's well maintained, but most naturally occurring affordable housing is privately held. And so when you have privately held housing, it is other than a code standard of living, which is really pretty minimal, right? That's like electrical, life and safety type stuff.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily an ideal standard of living. Is it safe? Is the building gonna fall down, right? Are you gonna electrocute yourself if you turn on the light? NOAA is harder to control. But if you look at the problem of affordable housing in Charlotte, and this is an affordable housing panel, so I'm gonna be quiet, but the point is, it's getting worse because all of those older apartment complexes, if you drive down Park Road, 7th, Monroe, I mean, for real, like they're gone.
Right.
Right. You drive down blocks and you're like, what was there? Oh, that was 300 units that rented for $750 a month. That
Right.
doesn't exist. So we're losing our old stock as opposed to preserving it. And we're not building new fast enough. So the gap today may be 30,000. After COVID, it's going to be worse.
Right.
So who do you call to get that handled? That's a call to action right there.
Say that again?
That's a call to action. Who can help get that resolved? I mean, that's a serious problem. That
is continued funding and support for affordable housing. They will put another $50 million bond on the ballot. We have to support that. The number, frankly, needs to be bigger. I don't know that that's practical in our aspiration. We need to continue to think about how private sector money can come to the table, but how do we support developers, whether it's Laurel Street or the Housing Partnership or some other private developers that have the same or similar mission to acquire some of that housing, make sure it's maintained at the right standard, and we can preserve what we have in addition to building new.
Historically, the way that societies provided affordable housing was through naturally occurring affordable housing. Old housing got cheaper and it got more affordable. And in the last 15 years or so, folks with money and choice are moving inward. And that's where you see not only the big apartment complexes being bought up, torn down, redeveloped, but just ordinary neighborhood houses that used to be an affordable rental space or an affordable ownership situation. You got a grandma who's on a fixed income, Social Security. She used to be able to own a house in Biddleville or Plaza Midwood or wherever. That is gone. And I think we need to be not merely raising housing bonds. That's a good thing. Keep doing it. But requiring that when you build new housing, that you build in some affordable units in every place. Otherwise, you're going 100 units here, 100 units there, and we're losing multiple hundred units in the same moment. And so my call to action would be to work on the folks in Raleigh, put together a coalition of people across the state, particularly real estate people, saying, yes, we do want to build affordable housing as a small part of everything we do. Because otherwise, the sand's running out of the hourglass faster than we're putting it in.
This is great, and we're going to have to move on, but Talia and Manuel, we might want to think as we think about these discussions that we do one strictly on housing. I think housing itself, because we didn't even get into the G word, gentrification. That's a discussion in itself. Talia, do we have any questions out there we need to address?
Yes, Ronnie, and thank you for bringing that up. That is actually a topic that we're trying to get into the schedule before we wrap this series up in February. There is another 2 questions actually that we need to have answered here. How does community gather capital under leadership who will steward it toward building up the entire ecosystem at rising levels of scales? And then can existing unifying organizations play a role like the church in bringing this kind of unified commitment?
Interesting. Who would like that? Dion?
I don't know that I caught the first part of the question, so I'm gonna sit back on this.
Say it again.
I'll read it again. How does a community gather capital under leadership who will steward it toward building up the entire ecosystem at rising levels of scales? And then would an organization like a church, or if not, what other types of organizations would be ideal in playing a role in bringing this kind of collective economics together?
Well, I'll jump in real quick and talk about St. Paul Baptist, real close to me in the Belmont neighborhood, where they said, all right, we need to help the grandmamas mostly to go to our church, but more generally, people who need affordable housing in the Belmont neighborhood, which is rapidly gentrifying. And so they bought up land adjacent to the church and put together a project of the kind. Dion, I think you were not involved in that one. Were you involved in that one?
We built Central Square is what it's called. Central Square.
Cool. Talk about that, because that's a church that's building good stuff, and they got a lot of pushback from the gentrifiers in the neighborhood too.
Dion?
I think the questions about capital and how do you bring capital together, I think to Tom's point, one of the ways I think you can have impact quickly is for folks to raise the capital or their resources. So the key transition there was St. Paul had land. They didn't write a big check to make that housing happen, but they put their land on the table. The park is doing the same. Little Rock AME Zion is doing the same. So I want to applaud the faith-based community in Charlotte for stepping up in that regard. So we have to think about resources, not just cash.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is more effectively implemented on a project by project basis. The idea that we're somehow going to aggregate all these resources and then have one strategy as to how to deploy it. And as an entrepreneur, that's spooky to me. Like the process of getting to that, or how long does that take to actually become the reality, seems far out.
A lot of nuances to that piece. You got another one, Talia?
I don't have another question. And I realize we're getting close to the bottom of the hour. I would like us to just kind of get our thoughts together around what the call to action is for today. And then we'll get ready to close things out.
Okay. You guys have thoughts around the call to action?
So we didn't talk about this a lot, but I think mine would be around capital. And rather than think about it all purely as raising capital and funds and investment capital, which I think there are some discussions in Charlotte about how investment capital can be used to support minority businesses. I actually want to call on our banking community. For us to be in one of the largest banking cities in Charlotte, in the country, and for a mid-sized business, I would describe our Laurel Street as barely bankable by bank standards in the city. And, you know, where do we get loans? Who is supporting us, financially? I think there are other opportunities, and there just isn't a very robust mid-sized company bank strategy. And certainly not one that has any particular focus, to my knowledge, on minority businesses.
Interesting. Gerald, you have any thoughts?
I would agree with that. I think the banks have to brought to the table with some sort of strategy to help better fund minority businesses. And one other thing that could help that is that we have minority banks that need to be more viable to this whole conversation and being a part of giving out funding. And they lack the funding, and so they need to be strengthened so that they can help with this, because they are closer to the situation. They have a better understanding of it. So how you get them to the level where they can actually play a bigger role in this, to me, is critical. But the banks have, and I agree, we are the second largest banking city in the country, and we can't get banks to actually get involved with making sure that minority businesses can survive.
Tom, you want to close us out?
Um, I commend what folks are saying right now. And for people like me, I'm not a person with capital. I'm kind of an ordinary person, and it has helped me to pay attention to this. I don't naturally think about real estate and capital formation, and I think a lot of folks are like that. A book that has really impacted me is something called The Color of Law.
Good book.
Community read done out of First Baptist West a couple of years ago. Best-selling book, very easy to read, that will give you context for the kind of things we're talking about today, and make us better voters, make us better investors, make us better supporters and applauders of folks like Dion Nelson and Aspire Community Capital.
Well, thank you. Thank each of you guys. This has been very, very informative. I've enjoyed it. And Manuel, we'll turn it back over to you.
I think the first words to come to mind is just wow. Thank you for your candor and your honesty. I think that this is the essence and the core of not only what Aspire Community Capital is about, but what we want our Aspire conversations to really focus on. Because if we don't get to the root cause and have genuine conversations like this, then I think that we're doing both our community and ourselves a disservice. So I thank you for Ronnie moderating a great panel. Tom, Gerald, Dion, thank you all for your honesty and participating. And we look forward to your continued engagement. Taya, any closing remarks?
Yes, perfect. Thanks again to everyone here, to everyone who's watching and will watch. Thank you to our sponsor, Kaufman Foundation, through the Start Us Up initiative. And of course, to all of our community partners, Wells Fargo Foundation, Packard Place, RevTech Labs, My Brother's Keeper, Stiletto Boston University. We appreciate each and every one of you, our team and our board. You are amazing. Without this, none of this would happen. So thank you. We appreciate your time. We hope you'll tune in for another conversation, and we'll post these calls to action so that you can all figure out how you can get involved and help us to move these things forward. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, guys.
And the panel, could you stick around for 1 second?
Don't cost you.